Oh, we are recording. Thank you, Angela. Uh, we are so pleased to have you for this evening's event of the Global Women's Caucus Feminist Literary Festival. This is our first ever literary festival, but the events have been just amazing. So far, we have hosted a screening of the Toni Morrison documentary, The Pieces I Am. We have had writers Audrey Edwards in conversation with Angela Fobbs and Carla Power in conversation with Ann Kratz. Tonight, we have Sheila Malovany Chevalier and Connie Board discussing their translation and their experience translating The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. That's what we have had. So I've told you what we've had in the past and what we're having tonight. Also coming up next, after tonight, we have Diane Johnson in conversation with Alan Riding. And this week, I will be giving a talk on the work of Octavia Butler. Then we will close our festival with a books and cocktails event where we give you cocktail recipes and you come with your favorite books. And we just have a night drinking, sharing cocktail recipes and talking books. So far, oh, and how could I forget, every Friday, if you haven't joined us yet, I see a lot of familiar faces, so you have been on. So some of you have been on. Every Friday, I host a writing drop-in. What's a writing drop-in? I give you a prompt, and then everyone turns off their screens and writes for 30 minutes. The writings have been transformative. Every meeting feels really deep and lovely because and the reason we're doing it is to celebrate not only writing and writers, but also the act of writing itself. So we hope you can catch us some Friday afternoon before the month is over. And again, we'll be capping off the festival with a books and cocktails event on Sunday the 24th. And before Sunday the 24th, we have Diane Johnson and Alan Riding in conversation on the 20th. So really 2 more events in addition to the writing drop-ins after tonight. So we hope you join us. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to present to you Sheila Malovany Chevalier and Connie Board talking about The Second Sex. Connie Board and Constance Board and Sheila Malovany Chevalier both graduated from Douglas College, Rutgers in 1963 and have been friends and working partners in Paris ever since. They have collaborated on many books and publications, as well as political and cultural activities around feminism and translation. Both had long careers at Sciences Po, l'Institut d'études politiques. Connie was several times chair of Democrats Abroad France and DNC member, and the initiator and mover behind many of the activities and developments in Democrats Abroad France and Democrats Abroad Global. Sheila and Connie were co-founders of the DAF Women's Caucus. The intellectual and personal highlight of their translating experiences has been The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir for the Random House Group. The British edition came out in 2009 and the American one in 2010. This life-changing adventure continues. So now I'll turn the floor over to Sheila and Connie.
Connie?
Connie, are you there?
Connie? Are you frozen?
Connie, if you just turn, let's see. Okay. Let's see, Connie, I think you're frozen. Okay, I'm going to stop your video, Connie, and then see if you can start speaking, if that helps. Oh, she has
Can you hear, Connie? Can you at least hear?
I think she's gone. I think she
Maybe
dropped
she
out.
stepped out. Yeah.
I think she dropped out. Maybe she'll rejoin in just a second.
Okay, I'll start then.
Okay.
And she'll pick up. So sorry for that glitch. Connie has been having trouble with her computer, and it's difficult to fix it. However, she's here in some form, and we're so happy to be in front of you and be part of the first ever Democrats Abroad Global Feminist Literary Festival. It's been so exciting this far, and there are lots more activities and events until the end of the month, as Joy has just described. We'll be talking about our favorite subject and the most fabulous intellectual adventure two Douglas College, Rutgers University girls could have imagined. We'll start at the beginning and go on from there. And as I said, I hope Connie will get on as soon as she can. In November of 1949, Les Éditions Gallimard published Le Deuxième Sexe by Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir once said in her youth that literature had the quality of assuring her an immortality that would make up for lost eternity. Indeed, if ever a work would assure immortality, The Second Sex, translated into English for the first time in 1953, would be that work. It was an immediate bestseller, selling something like 20,000 copies in a week. That's a lot even for today. Nothing she had done or written or wrote thereafter would compare with the impact of The Second Sex on France, on the world, and on history. Simone de Beauvoir was well known when she turned to the question of women in her famous work. She had already written a great deal, novels, plays, and philosophical works, and her public persona was something to be noticed. Already as a student, while officially she came in second in the difficult and competitive French agrégation exam in philosophy, what really happened was that the first place was given to the man, Jean-Paul Sartre, who would become her lover and, more importantly, her life partner. Beauvoir lived according to the principles of existentialism, which liberated her from her strict Catholic and bourgeois upbringing. She was shocking to some, a champion to others. When she wrote Le Deuxième Sexe, she was writing a philosophical essay, a treatise about what it means to be the other in society, a key idea in existentialism. Simone de Beauvoir didn't consider herself to be a feminist until much later, but she came to recognize the condition of women as she progressed in the book. She said in her memoir, The Force of Circumstance, La Force des Choses, 1963, quote, "I never had the feeling of inferiority. No one ever said to me, 'You think this way because you are a woman.' My femininity never bothered me at all," end of quote. It was at Sartre's instigation and her desire to write about her own life, coupled with her philosophical background, that she wrote about the condition of women in general, about woman as other, the other sex, the second sex. We'll pass on the saga of how Connie and I got the commission to do the translation in 2006. Our translation came out in 2010 and 11. It was generally established that the 1953 translation was sorely inaccurate and inadequate, and we were commissioned for the job. At the time, we had both been living in Paris for over 40 years. We went to college together. We taught at Sciences Po for many, many years, teaching literature and American civilization. And we wrote English grammar books and worked on multimedia language projects. Because of our connection to the USA and to the English language, both personally and professionally, one of Simone de Beauvoir's early attractions for us, besides her feminism, was her interest in the USA just at the time of writing The Second Sex. Beauvoir made a landmark trip to the United States in 1947. Can you imagine how exciting it was for her? The Second World War was still so much part of life in France at that time. And the USA was, to an intelligent, famous French woman, all bright lights and booming. She traveled around the USA by Greyhound bus and learned a great deal about the USA that was important for her forever. She visited American women's universities and drew from that many observations about women that contributed to her analyses in The Second Sex. She was fascinated not only by American women, but also by racial issues. She met and became friends with Richard Wright, the famous and controversial Black American writer, who later on lived in Paris. She met Nelson Algren, with whom she had a long and passionate love affair. He wrote about Chicago lowlife, and his most famous book was The Man with a Golden Arm, about drug addiction. She was reading Gunnar Myrdal's groundbreaking historical book on race in America called An American Dilemma, The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy, which came out in 1944. So The Second Sex's references to America and American women and men abound. Beauvoir saw in action what it meant to be the other, came face to face with the master-slave relationship and other fundamental issues from probing into American society. Her gaze on American culture and the way she extracted ideas from it to write The Second Sex, coupled with our own experience and knowledge of the two cultures and languages, informed our approach to the translation. This book has had repercussions all over the world. It has been called the Bible, the keystone in women's history. There are two separate books in French, as you saw on the slides, but both are always in one volume in English with two distinct parts. Part 1 is called Facts and Myths, and Part 2 is called Lived Experience, and they correspond to the two French volumes. To show you the breadth and depth of this whole work, here are a few chapter heads of Facts and Myths, which is more philosophical than Part 2, Lived Experience. Destiny, which encompasses biology, psychology, historical materialism, then history of the world, and then myths, every lie ever expounded about women. And here are the chapter heads from Lived Experience. They deal with specific ages and stages of women's lives: childhood, the girl, sexual initiation, the married woman, the mother, from maturity to old age, the narcissist, the woman in love, and the mystic. The treatise ends with one of the most famous chapters, The Independent Woman. It sums up what the ideal situation would be for both women and men, the ideal of equality between men and women. Beauvoir remains, at the time, perfectly optimistic in this description of the ideal world. In The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir focuses attention on women in all stages of life and throughout history. The method was revolutionary. Never had a study of this kind been so extensive. She collects every scrap of empirical information she can find and comes out with the conclusion that wherever and whenever women function in society, a basic inequality with men exists. She says in her memoir, The Force of Circumstance, "It is strange and stimulating to suddenly discover at the age of 40 an aspect of the world that was blindingly obvious, but that I had never seen. That was a quote. She discovers, and we discover, that, quote, this world was a masculine world. My childhood was nourished with myths created by men. I would not have reacted at all in the same way if I had been a boy, end of quote. Thus, the much quoted and most famous conclusion in the book appears. One is not born, but becomes woman. To be feminine really is a code for being secondary, being dominated. Simone de Beauvoir sets out to deconstruct the myths and inventions, one by one, that force a woman to live as a secondary being, relative to another being. These myths are and have been created all through history and in every discipline and in all areas of existence. Simone de Beauvoir broke the code with the second sex. The year after we graduated from college in 1963, Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique, closely modeled after significant chapters of the second sex. The feminine mystique being an expression Beauvoir had invented as l'éternel féminin. And Beauvoir's anti-essentialist view of women opened the door to second-wave feminism, which has recognized that throughout history, culture has been marked by a systematic and systemic oppression of women. Here is one significant statement Beauvoir makes on the subject. When I use the words woman or feminine, I obviously refer to no archetype, to no immutable essence. In the present state of education and customs must be understood to follow most of my affirmations. There is no question of expressing eternal truths here, but rather of describing the common ground from which all singular feminine existence stems. At the end of the first volume in the French, in the chapter called Myths, perhaps one of the most revealing, avant-garde, and innovative chapters of the second sex, and one of both Connie's and my favorites, Beauvoir launches a feminist textual literary analysis. She chooses 4 important French writers and 1 English one, D.H. Lawrence, to deconstruct, and could certainly have found more, showing how literature and male writers have been willing accomplices, if not activists, casting the woman in a secondary role to men. D.H. Lawrence gets a very bad rating from Beauvoir. Stendhal was her favorite, but even he expected altruism from women. Later in the book, she valorizes women writers from Louisa May Alcott to Colette, Catherine Mansfield, Dorothy Parker, and Virginia Woolf. She quotes extensively many women writers of her time, today largely unknown and very unfortunate, but worthy of inclusion. It's not necessary to tell you that some progress has been made. The most impressive is the whole Me Too and its subsidiary movements. Is Connie back?
I am.
Okay. I'm going to give the Zoom floor to Connie now.
Ours was not the first translation of the Deuxième Sexe into English, as we've already mentioned, but it is the first complete one. H.M. Parsley translated it in 1953.
That's too faint. Can you talk louder?
H.M. Parsley translated it in 1953, but upon the insistence of his publisher, Alfred Knopf, he abridged and edited passages, restructured Simone de Beauvoir's syntax and her style, and simplified much of the complex philosophical language. Questions naturally arose about the act of translating itself, about ourselves, about our roles, and about our responsibility to Simone de Beauvoir and her readers. Translation, very interestingly, has always been fraught with such questions, and different times have produced different conceptions of translating. Perhaps this is why, while great works of art seldom age, translations do. The job of the translator for us is not to simplify or readapt the text for a modern or a foreign audience, but to find the true voice of the original work as it was written. As it was written, but as it was written for its time and with its original intent. When the text is an opus like The Second Sex, whose impact on society was so decisive, the task of bringing into English the closest version possible of Simone de Beauvoir's voice, expression, and ideas is greater even still. We translated the Deuxième Sexe as it was written, unabridged and unsimplified, maintaining Beauvoir's philosophical language. The long and dense paragraphs that were changed in the 1953 translation to conform to a more traditional style of punctuation, or even eliminated, have now been translated as she wrote them, all within the confines of English, of course. Long paragraphs, sometimes going on for pages, are a stylistic aspect of her writing that is essential, integral to the development of her arguments. Cutting her sentences, cutting her paragraphs, using a more traditional and conventional punctuation do not render Simone de Beauvoir's voice. Beauvoir's style expresses her reasoning, her rationale. Her prose has a grammar of its own, and that grammar follows a logic. We did not modernize the language Beauvoir used and had access to in 1949. This decision precluded the use of, hold on, the word gender, for example, as applied today. Beauvoir never uses this word in the book, but this is indeed what she is writing over 800 pages about. The question of vocabulary was primordial in many respects. Thus, we relied heavily on etymological dictionaries and found that many words that we thought were new turned out not to be, and vice versa. We stayed close to Beauvoir's complicated syntax and punctuation, as well as certain usages of language that to us felt a bit awkward at first. One of the difficulties was her extensive use of the semicolon. As you all know, the semicolon is a punctuation mark that has suffered setbacks over the past decades in English and in French, and has somewhat fallen into disuse. So we carried Beauvoir's style into English as much as possible. We also took the decision to keep close to Beauvoir's tense usage, most noticeably regarding the French use of the present tense for the historical past. One particularly complex and compelling issue was how to translate la femme. When Beauvoir uses femme without an article to signify woman as determined by society, we do the same. So the famous sentence, I'm going to say it in French first, on ne naît pas femme, on le devient, was translated by H.M. Parsley as, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Our translation reads, one is not born, but rather becomes woman. Here we understand Beauvoir as talking about woman as a construct, not born, but determined. Now this tiny change, one is not born, but becomes woman, might seem unimportant, but it has an immense impact in the world of Simone de Beauvoir, obviously. A book came out last year entitled The Life of a Sentence, in which the removal of the a The indefinite article is addressed in many essays. It is a philosophical question, one of interpretation of the meaning of Simone de Beauvoir gave to it, a grammatical and translation question. The Second Sex is a philosophical treatise, as Sheila has already said, and one of the most important books of the 20th century, upon which much of the feminist movement was built. Beauvoir, the philosopher, is present right from the start of the book and all the way through, building on the ideas of Hegel, Marx, Kant, Heidegger, Husserl, and others. She developed, shared, and appropriated these concepts along with her equally brilliant contemporaries, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, and Lévi-Strauss, and others, who were redefining philosophy to fit the times. Before it was published, Beauvoir read Lévi-Strauss's Elementary Structures of Kinship and learned from it and used those ideas in The Second Sex. Although the ideas and concepts are challenging in the book, as she wrote it in 1949, it was immediately accepted by a general readership. Our goal in this translation has been to conform to the same ideal in English, to say what Simone de Beauvoir said as close to the way she said it in a both challenging, yes, but very readable text. So, thank you for listening. There's a lot more to talk about, so we're going to throw it out to the audience, and if people have questions, we'd be very happy to answer.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Connie and Sheila. If anyone has a question, you can type star hand up in the chat, and we will be happy to answer your questions. But while everyone is thinking of a question, I have a question. It's more of a technical question. How do two people work on a translation together? How does that work?
Very happily, I can tell you.
Very happily. You want to answer, Connie, first?
Well, go ahead, Sheila. I just spoke, so you can.
Well, as we said, we've been friends for, you can figure out how many years. We've never had a serious problem between us. And so as far as getting along, that never presented the slightest problem. From the technical point of view of actually working, what we did, we started in 2006, and technically a lot of things have changed since then. So we used email constantly and the telephone. And each of us would do, for example, 10 pages and then send it by email to the other person, I would send it to Connie, and Connie would go over it word for word, word by word, and do any possible changes and other things, and then send it back to me. And we used color codes. I know everybody today uses track changes, but we never got comfortable with track changes, and I'm still not. And then we would go back and forth maybe 10 times or 20 times until we were both satisfied with the 10 pages that the other person had done. And even before finishing a batch of paper, a batch of sentences, we would call each other up and say, can you stop what you're doing and help me with this word or with that sentence? And so that's how we work together.
Wow.
Well, also, sometimes we would really come to a roadblock. And in that case, we would call in our husbands, okay? My husband's French, and he's a lawyer, and he loves language. And Sheila's husband was a real philosopher. He would sit and read Sartre, and he would read all of the works of Simone de Beauvoir before we could finally make a decision of which word we could use. And if we had a variance in opinion about which word it should be, our husbands would vote. So my husband always voted for Sheila's word, and Bill always voted for my word. And then we just had to kind of figure it out. But it
Wow.
was a labor of love and a lot of delving into.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. That sounds absolutely wonderful. We have a few questions in the queue. First up is Catherine. If you want to unmute and ask your question, Catherine.
Yeah, I'd like to know how long it took you to do the 2 volumes.
It took 4 years, if you can believe it. It took 2 people 4 years, and it took Simone de Beauvoir, I think, 1 year, Sheila?
A few years, because
And the
she
other part
started in 2 years, no, 2 years, 2 years.
She started in 47 and she
Right.
finished in 49.
No,
And
but
it came out 1 volume first, and then the other volume followed it. But we try to figure out how she would write a book like this in 2 years. I mean, it seems humanly impossible.
Okay,
The other interesting thing is that Parsley did it without a computer, alone, in 1 year, but he died right after. We're still going strong.
I think you misunderstood my question. I wondered how long it took you to do the translation of the 2 volumes. I realized that she did it, but you said you started in 2006. You
Yes,
finished
Connie said it took us 4 years.
4 years. Okay. And in those days, you had to manage your family and your kids and everything. So how did you manage to send each other messages and, get it done? Are you fast workers, fast translators?
But we're night workers. We work at night a lot, and we work sometimes until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And we also wake each other up in the middle of the night. And it just works. We find the time. It's true, we're both very busy, but
Connie,
But we
even more
loved
than
doing
I.
we love doing it.
We love
I
doing
guess-
it. And I sense in your question something interesting. Our husbands were, I mean, as feminists as we are, and as much as we complain about our husbands like everybody else, they really were incredibly supportive, but incredibly supportive all the time. And they never, neither of our husbands made a big deal if we left dinner and talked to each other over for the and didn't come back to the table. I mean, yeah, we were lucky.
Okay, thanks for that question, Catherine. Next up, we have Shelley, followed by Sally.
Shelley. I'm wondering if de Beauvoir was ever involved in any political movement for women's rights. And after the Second Sex was published, how did that influence a feminist movement in France and elsewhere? I mean, just very concretely and practically.
When she wrote The Second Sex, she was not yet a feminist, but she had all the makings of one. Then when she wrote it and became aware, as some of the quotes show, she became a very involved, very, very highly involved feminist, and lent her and she marched and had feminist friends and contacts and activities constantly. And she lent her name to many, many, many movements. And I think it was in 1974 when there was the 343 French women who said they had abortions. She was at the head of the movement. she and also at the end of her life, toward the end of her life, she said how disappointed she was that more progress hadn't been made. She was a very, very, very devoted, activist feminist.
I can say something else. I just want to add to that. I don't mean to be proprietary when I say this, but the feminist movement really took off in the 70s, let's say at the end of the 60s and into the 70s. And as much as we insist that Betty Friedan copied the book, when the American feminists finally jumped into this, by the way, she tremendously appreciated the American feminists. When Betty Friedan came out with the feminine Mystique in 1964, and we can show you exactly where she got all of her information. It was out of the second sex. I met Betty Friedan later in life, and she admitted it. She greatly admired Simone de Beauvoir. Betty Friedan was much more of a philosopher than she let on, because she was trying to appeal to a middle class of American women. And that's exactly where this struck home, because she was writing about the tiresome job it is to be a woman, housework, et cetera, et cetera. And Simone de Beauvoir goes into that. Betty Friedan left out a lot of the philosophy because she just knew she had an audience out there, and it was not an audience of philosophers. French people happen to be much more connected with philosophy because they learn it in school. They do philosophy for their baccalaureates, and they have a notion of philosophy. Betty Friedan didn't tool around with that. She went straight for the gut, and she went and talked about the tiresome job, the difficult job it is to be a woman. The feminist movement took off in America and then came back again to France, where there always was a feminist movement, but far more theoretical, if you will. And that, I think, it kind of went back and forth from France to America, and then back to France again, and then all hell broke loose. You all know.
Right.
Definitely.
Thanks for the answers. Now we have Sally, and then I have a question that was sent in.
Thanks, Joy. Sheila and Connie, I actually do know the story of how you came to translate The Second Sex, and I think it would be terrific if you could share it with us. So I'm going to ask you to do that. But I also have two other comments. One is, I don't know why we keep asking women how they manage to juggle family and work. I find it absolutely absurd. Nobody has ever asked a man, no matter who he is, how he juggles family and work. I find it shocking. My third comment is, I am still having a hard time getting my head around the use of the word woman without the, Sheila's going to yell at me because I'm going to say this wrong. What is it, the article or the person?
Indefinite article.
Thank you, Sheila. She'll always correct the English. I respect everything you did, but if you have time, maybe you can, if nobody else is interested, we'll do this offline again. But is it because you say everyone says man with a capital M and therefore women? No, I don't know. I'm just sharing my thoughts with you, and I'll shut up now. But do share your story if people are interested. I think it's great, and it speaks to why women have a hard time getting anything published. I think anyway. But I'll stop now. Thank you.
So the story of how you came to translate, and then if you could also go into, if you could clarify a bit the use of the indefinite, or not using an article in front of woman.
Excuse me, before you go on, I cannot put a question in because I'm not technical, and so therefore I have to put my hand up physically. Okay.
Oh, okay, Sharon. Yes, you are next. Oh, I'll say the question that came to me in the chat, and then you're up next, Sharon. And thanks for. I'll keep an eye on you that you're raising your hand.
Okay.
Connie, do you want to answer Sally about our saga?
Yeah. For many, many years in the United States, Random House, no, it wasn't Random House, it was Knopf at the time, was harassed by feminists because many of the feminists were professors, they were teachers, and they were trying to teach the second sex. And many of them had read it in French. But when they got to certain passages that were crucially important about women's liberation and women's equality, they weren't in the English version, mainly because that version, the publisher, Knopf, and Alfred Knopf himself, said, what is this book? They thought they were buying a book on sex, actually, the American publishers, because it was the era of the Kinsey Report and sexual behavior, and people were talking a lot about this. This is in the late 40s and 50s. So that's what they thought they were getting. It wasn't what they were getting. They were getting this philosophical treatise. So poor Parsley, we always call him poor Parsley, because he was a zoologist. They hired a zoologist because they thought it was going to be about your body, yourself. And it's not what they got when they started reading Parsley's translation. So they insisted that he cut out a lot of the parts and make it easy. They said the American reader will never buy this book. They'll never understand it. And it basically, it's kind of true because existentialism hadn't entered into the United States. There was language there that wasn't even being used in the United States. So his translations were very, very basic. He wrote to Simone de Beauvoir. He asked her, could you explain what this concept means or something? She never answered him. And so the book was not great. The translation was not great. Academics started, I think, in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, harassing Knopf. Please give us another translation of this book. It's not academic enough. It's not valid. Okay, but they never wanted to. And actually, these women got on the nerves of the publishers because you have to understand the second sex sold every year. It was one of those books that people kept buying. But finally, when was it, Sheila? In the 90s, right? In the 90s,
What?
There were New York Times articles about guess what's missing in the second
No,
sex.
it was started in 1981 was, what's her name's?
Harvard Times.
Peg Simon's article.
Okay, so
1981.
we won't go into,
Guess what's missing?
we won't go into guess what's missing in the second sex. This myth, it wasn't a myth, it was true, kept perpetuating and growing until finally it hit the New York Times in an article. She wrote that article when? At the end of the 90s, huh?
Who wrote it?
Am I cutting out?
You were
Sarah.
cutting out. Sarah,
Yeah.
what's her name? Glazer.
Sarah Glazer wrote an article. It was in the New York Times Book Review. And Knopf was getting embarrassed by the fact that they had never published a better translation.
You're cutting out.
And
Okay, go on.
Okay, go ahead, Sheila. Go ahead.
No, you
The
can go
story
on.
is very long. So we don't want to tell all the details.
No. Okay, so
Yeah.
so so there was the 50th anniversary of the publication, the French publication of The Second Sex. That was in 1999. There was a conference actually of the Simone de Beauvoir Society that we went to. It was right in the 5th arrondissement here. And we heard all of the people. It was the 50th anniversary. So there were people from all over the world. And one of the main themes of the conference was that you couldn't trust the translation And the errors were compounded because South Americans, the Chinese, they used the already faulty American translation, English translation, to do their own. And so there were mistakes upon mistakes upon mistakes. I'd like to say one thing that is of primary importance. Regardless of the faults of this first translation, look what it did. It virtually started the second wave, as Connie expressed, in the United States. It changed the lives of millions of women, millions of women. Okay, so we have to make sure that we understand that basic thing. So Connie and I turned to each other and turned to somebody we knew from Sciences Po, who just happened to be the rights editor at Gallimard, Simone de Beauvoir's publisher. And we said to her, we want to translate this book. And she was delighted because, and I'm skipping a million things, she was delighted, even though she had nothing to do with it. She nevertheless was an important, very important person in the publishing world. And she wanted us to do it because Gallimard and other people were fed up with the fact that it wasn't being retranslated in the United States. And also they were fed up with these women, mostly women in the United States, who were demanding all kinds of things for the new translation, for a new translation. So this person went around to find a publisher, and she decided to go first to the English side. And that's why the first edition of our translation came out from an English publisher called
Jonathan Cape.
Jonathan Cape, which was the original publisher of the 1953 translation as well. We found a fantastic editor. She found a fantastic editor. And so then Knopf in the United States was shamed into bringing out an American version. Very, very often there are two versions of a book. So Les Inséparables, the new Simone de Beauvoir book that has just come out, there was one translation by put out by a British publisher, and another translation, totally different translation, put out by an American publisher. So it was not so unusual as we thought. So that's the saga of the commission that we finally got. That alone took 5 years to happen. This was a very, very long process.
You have to understand that the one advantage we had is we were not in American academia.
That's right. That's it.
And Knopf didn't want an American academic. The American academics wanted annotated versions. They wanted all kinds of crazy things that Knopf was not ready to publish. And Simone de Beauvoir didn't write it that way. She had footnotes, but you can't start annotating a book like that. Then it becomes a university textbook. This was written for the grand public. This was written for shop girls. This book attracted women factory workers. So it had to stay that way, and they insisted, which is exactly the way we translated it, with footnotes, but Simone de Beauvoir's footnotes, no annotations. We published it for the public. So
and it feels
they
that
finally
way.
did it, but probably because we didn't come from the American academic community.
I think so.
It feels that way. It's very accessible, and it seems that you have maintained the original spirit. The question that came into my chat from Janetta, it says, can you reflect on how revisiting her work might add positively around the dialogue around Me Too and other feminist movements today? So speaking of being a book for the grand public, speaking of being for the people, how does this book reflect positively for feminist movements, the current feminist movement of Me Too and other movements going on today?
I just want to say, Joy, excuse me, but wasn't Sharon dying to talk?
I said I'd say the one that came in and then Sharon.
Oh, excuse me. I thought
It's
it was
okay.
the other way around. Don't want to lose you, Sharon.
No, I got Sharon Ann, don't worry.
Okay.
Thanks, though.
Connie?
Well, what I think is, Sheila mentioned this before, I think in the beginning, or you said it somewhere, and we've said it over and over again. This is not a book with anecdotes. This is not a book that ages. It is deeply, deeply philosophical. It's about the master-slave relationship. It's a key element in race, in gender, and in everything that we're living today. You can skim over the fact that she talks about women who have to wash out their stockings at night or something like that, or who's whatever. That doesn't matter. That's not what this book is about. It's so profoundly philosophical, it will never age. It might be difficult to go through all of this philosophy, but that's what you're seeing, something far deeper. And also, don't forget, she's probably one of the first people who wrote about lesbianism. She wrote about the dilemmas of married women. You know, I'm a mother of 6 children, and she wrote a chapter on motherhood that is so true, how difficult motherhood is, what children, the games children play with their mothers, all of the traps that women fall into. So it's just, what can I say? It's deep. It's deeper than just the superficial stories about, you know.
I'll just add just one little thing. The book is still, it's almost like a guidebook on how to think, how it can teach us that not how it can teach us, it does teach us how to analyze the reactions that have not changed too much in the society around us, that at least now we do have the Me Too movements, but these movements, we're lucky to have them in most Western countries, but look at the majority of the women in the world who are still suffering. And a book like this helps you to think about it, helps you to analyze it. And it's like a call for action as well.
Great, thank you. Sharon Ann.
Yeah, I hope this is not too trivial a question, but when Connie was talking about the woman and a woman, technically I could not understand what she said, and I would like to hear that again because I think it was probably very interesting.
Okay, for those of you who understand French, the French sentence is on ne naît pas femme, on le devient. So what you become, it's the difference between sexuality and gender, okay? You basically are born a man or a woman. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this, and she even goes into that, whether you're born a man or a woman. But let's say you are born physically a woman, a man is born physically a man. You become something because society puts you into a category. That's what you would maybe call essentialism. One would say that because you are a woman, you are essentially weak or sensitive, or you're beautiful, or you're essentially sensitive or magical.
And only that.
Yeah, it's casting a person into a category. That's not what woman is. The le of on le devient for us was not a woman or a man, or the way you're born. on devient, you become something else after you're born, whatever sex you're born. Is that clear?
I'll try
It
to.
gives-
And
it-
of course, Sally had the same question. On ne n'est
Yeah.
pas femme, there is no article in French. Okay, so French and English are not the same, but they're quite similar in many ways. So we said to ourselves, well, before that, on ne n'est pas femme, what we understood from that sentence in French is that if you use the word femme without any article at all, you're saying that it is a concept. You're using woman as a concept, and that means it's not a person. It's the concept of what woman means in our society.
And it's almost like an adjective. You're on ne n'est pas femme, on le devient. You become woman. I don't know the way you.
Well,
it's almost
like
beautiful,
like in
ugly.
right, like that's right.
It's more of an adjective.
It's a state of being. It's not an individual person.
So it's important to say a woman and not just woman.
No, it's important not for us in our interpretation not to say one
Okay.
one is not born, one becomes woman. And what we interpret in Simone de Beauvoir is that that shouldn't be. What should be is that you become a human being that happens to be a woman today. Now, with all of the trans and other new understandings of sexuality, one of the good questions we think and people ask is, what would Simone de Beauvoir have thought? What would she think of trans and queer? And that's a very open question. I personally think, but that's because I love Simone de Beauvoir and I think that she was so far-seeing. I think that she would have accepted it and gone with it and developed an inclusive philosophy. But that's my own opinion.
Yeah, it seems to me also that her philosophy is already inclusive, you know, like if you're using woman as a concept, then you can take it a step further and say gender is a concept, you know, and
completely.
so it already lays the groundwork for that type of inclusivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, by the way, we could go on for hours on this very subject, but because there are conferences, entire conferences. There's a book written, as I mentioned, about this kind of interpretation. So
Wow.
maybe we said enough.
You
Here,
definitely clarified that. I see Sally said that it's clearer to her. And I think what you said also, in a lot of ways, it makes it more not only simpler to understand your choice to translate it that way, but also it makes it clearer the entire mission or vision of the work, to look at how womanhood is treated in society and how it becomes, because of the way it's treated, how it becomes, it can become a burden, and how it behooves us to look past the ways that it has been put upon us or can be put upon us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been 10 years since the translation. Any thoughts on this past decade since you have, oh, there's something from Shelley. Sorry,
Yeah.
I always want to hear from other people before I talk more. Yeah. Shelley says in 1970, in her first college course, the teacher had us read The Second Sex and The Feminine Mystique. I can't describe how these works changed my life. I walked out of that class knowing who I was, a feminist.
Yay.
So did a lot of other people, Shelley.
So can you reflect on the past 10 years?
Well,
Since
I'll start.
Yeah.
As soon as the book was published, we started traveling, and we traveled not all over the world, but a lot. I'd also like to say that Rusty Steyer, who's preparing the Canadian Thanksgiving, so she's running around her kitchen, I see, but Rusty was our classmate, and she helped us tremendously because she gave us her research assistant. So every time we had a problem, because we weren't in the United States, we often needed to consult books and things like that in the United States or in an American library. Rusty helped us tremendously. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, dear Rusty, again. But we went everywhere. So one of the first places we went was to Rusty's university, which was York University in Toronto, because Rusty had a women's center, and we spoke there for the 50th anniversary, I think, of it. Yeah. We went to so many places, so many trips. And so that those first few years was, on a personal level, an absolute, it was one more life-changing thing to visit India for almost a month, for example, and Australia for almost a month, and to see the influence of Simone de Beauvoir and the interest of Simone de Beauvoir. So I'll leave my impressions at that for the moment.
But we were invited to 50 universities in the United States in the first couple of years. But the top, Harvard, Barnard, Stanford. Oh my God, we got to know the United States, and it was incredible. People were so happy to be able to talk about Simone de Beauvoir again, and to hear a new take on Simone de Beauvoir, the new take being the old take, the original take. And then, as Sheila said, we were invited to different countries to speak at university. We almost always spoke at universities or in Alliances Françaises. The French government paid for us to go to Australia for a month, that Sheila talked about, India. I mean, it was a dream come true. It was absolutely incredible.
Wow. Sharon Ann has her hand up again.
So is it as bad to say a man, a woman? Is it the same difference? You said when you say a before, it's not good, and
Sharon Ann, it's not a question of being good or bad. It's a question of interpretation. That's all.
But you kind of colored it as negative. So if I say a man, that's exactly as bad?
No, but I didn't mean to imply that it was bad.
But Sharon, think of the difference between a man is walking down the street,
yeah,
and man created, or God created man. Think of the difference. Man is very often used without an article, because man covers a whole entire concept, but that concept is a concept of superiority. Why not for women? Why does women have to have an article and man doesn't? We're not saying everywhere, only in the specific situation where it encompasses a concept.
I think it's wonderful that you're thinking about it, Sharon Ann. Anyway,
believe us, we thought about it a lot.
And no, it's not. I'm not disagreeing with you. I just want to understand what you're.
Yeah, and I'm really glad
say,
you
so
followed
therefore,
up with it, Sharon.
too, me
you
Oh,
say
too.
a woman
Be-
and a man should be as bad, but it's not as bad because man is in a certain position anyway in society, so he doesn't have to worry about becoming a man, where a woman has to be worried about that or whatever. I mean, worried, but concerned.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So we have Diane D with her physical hand up, and then we've got Catherine who's in the chat. Diane, go ahead.
Is that our Diane DeLome?
You're on mute, Diane. Hey, I'll just unmute you. Diane, you were on mute.
How
There
is
you
that?
go. That's better.
Okay, there
Go
we
ahead. Mhm.
Well, actually, Sheila and Connie began what I was going to say, which was that the fact that they were invited and have been invited for years shows that there was really a need for this new translation, and there was a gap, and that this filled this translation up. The other thing that it made me think of was that do you know, Sheila and Connie, if there have been other translations in other languages
Oh.
that have been sparked by your translation, and the fact that, of course,
Well,
you said at the beginning, I just want to finish that the not your translation, but the old translation was used to translate the book into other languages. Do you know if this has happened with your own book, or if there were translations directly?
oh, there are so many translations directly. We have met many of the translators. We met the Finnish translator. We met the Chinese translator. We met the show my ignorance, Slovakia or Slovenia.
Slovakian.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, I can't remember. Tiny countries, because of a renewal of interest in Simone de Beauvoir, published their own translations. But no, I don't think that anybody would dare to not do their own nowadays.
So they did, and these are recent translations. That
Yes.
you're speaking of, very
Yes.
recent. Yeah. Did you ever discuss any technical points and difficulties?
Definitely,
Some of them,
definitely.
yeah, that must have been very
And
interesting.
also, Diane, the conference that Connie mentioned, we can send you the information. In fact, it's I think it's next month. It's about translating Simone de Beauvoir. It's about translating The Second Sex
All over the world.
all over the world.
Yeah, here.
So the need was there, and it is still vibrant and alive.
That's
Could I
right.
make one more comment, because I'll have to leave soon? I was wondering, you said that this was such a seminal book for the question of feminism and women. The recent book Caste that came out covered every aspect of race relations. I don't know what the outcome will be and how long this book and the impact it will have, but to me it rang a bell that there was a similarity in covering every single aspect, at least.
Very interesting comparison.
Mm-hmm. Good, I'm going to have to say.
Okay, nice seeing you,
seeing you.
Diane.
Do you know,
Bye.
Diane,
Bye.
we read Cat.
We read
We'll have
Caste
to
for
talk
the
more
Global
about Cat.
Caucus.
Oh, you did? Well, I missed that. I read it with my book group, yeah. Mhm.
And you know
Sorry.
something? Almost every time I read a piece of feminism or a book like Caste, Simone de Beauvoir pops in every line. Everything that we learned in Simone de Beauvoir comes through in these new books that are coming out about identity, whether it be race, gender. No,
She's a bit of the foundation
Yes.
for all of these being built up on an awareness.
You know, at this conference that's coming up, we're going to have the Iranian translator of The Second Sex. Can you believe it?
Oh, that would be really.
Czechoslovakia.
So let's
When is
take
this?
Catherine. Oh, can we put the information for that conference
would
in
be
our
good.
chat?
Okay.
Do you know? if you know the
Maybe
date.
Connie can, but I won't be able to find it quickly enough.
Well, just tell us the dates quickly, Connie.
Yeah,
And then we'll
you could put it online.
we'll
Can
come
put
back
it
to
online.
it. Okay.
Can you find the dates, Connie?
Yeah, keep going and I'll find it.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll have Catherine's question.
You were talking about the future, what's going on today. And you mentioned the fact of, there's the gender issue and et cetera. And there's a movement, at least in France, sort of anti-feminist that, they're too aggressive and things like that. And it's very disturbing to me. And I was just wondering how you view this, in our current political situation, either in France or in the US.
It's terrible. It's terrible. It's discouraging. It's shameful. It's shameful. It's so closely connected to class and race as well. But there have always been naysayers in all movements, and I think, yeah, that makes me furious. Makes me furious, but I think that there are always people who are afraid of moving forward and afraid of movements that are inclusive, and they want to remain exclusive, even women, even when it's against themselves.
Yeah, what I find interesting about particularly what's the way the French version of Me Too, Balance Ton Paul, was the way it was received. It actually became like a generational divide here, because you had the older actresses who those two actresses whose names I blank on, but who spoke out and said, come on, girls, this is how men are, and we went through it, and you'll go through it.
You mean Catherine Deneuve?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shameful.
Yeah. Funny how that.
Do you all have any other thoughts on that, like on a generational divide on feminism? Do you think Simone de Beauvoir would have, because she wrote during the time of those actresses and during your, time, do you feel that she would have been in support of Me Too? Or do you think she would have taken a more,
I think she would. I mean, for me, there's not the slightest doubt. She was at the forefront of all of these movements that in the past, and that hasn't changed very much. She supported Gisèle Halimi and abortion. She understood so much in the second sex about women's role. No, I think that, and that's still what we're talking about. The causes have not changed very much, as we were talking about before we started tonight. That's what's so sad.
Connie has put the information for that event, the International Simone de Beauvoir Society.
Are any of you old enough to remember Susan Faludi's book, Backlash?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, well, it was striking, the games that are played against women. And Simone de Beauvoir talks about it in The Second Sex all the time. And that's why there's that feminist mantra, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that the feminists always say. You can never let your guard down.
Never let it down.
So it seems that you, what were you going to say, Sheila?
No, nothing.
I was going to say, it seems that you feel that the second sex is a quintessential intersectional text, you feel that it covers a lot of different types of inequality. Um, do you have any um, statements or anything else to add on specifically for the current movement for Black lives? I know we talked a lot about, feminism today. You did speak about caste. Do you feel that that? How would you respond to anyone who says that, the second sex isn't relevant to people who are not white?
Well,
And we have Angela Shaw talking about Kimberly Crenshaw, who actually coined the term that I just used, intersectionality.
I think that
Kimberly Crenshaw says 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Angela, thanks.
I think that there are criticisms that can be brought to Simone de Beauvoir, that it was essentially middle class white women. But I think that, yes, she was very far reaching. And I think that she would have embraced a larger field and the other and women of all colors eventually. I give her that. I give her the what is that expression? The benefit of the doubt in this. And I also think that the criticism of her is important, but I think that, like in all philosophers and in all ideas, you can take most of what she says. If that part really bothers you, well, it's a valid criticism. But I think that you can still take her philosophy and go with it.
Well, the way I feel, Joy, about Simone de Beauvoir and race is I don't think she found her voice or really saw what a master-slave relationship was. And she says it. She says it in her memoirs. She says it in her letters with Nelson and Algren until she came to America. And then she really saw what a racial problem was. And she used the same language. If you look at the language of Simone de Beauvoir, it was civil rights, early civil rights language. So something in there is similar. And it would be interesting to do that study. I'm sure there are papers on this very issue.
There are. I have some somewhere around my documents, and there are lots of papers. Well, Connie, in the last Simone de Beauvoir seminar that we participated in, there was a paper on Simone de Beauvoir and race.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is in some of her letters that I read, I don't know if they were to Richard Wright or what, she thought America in the 50s, as much as she was inspired by a lot of the ideas of women, etc., she thought it was pathetic that all the writers were male machist writers. And she said, what is wrong with America that they're not dealing with the real racial problem? I don't think she felt that there was that kind of a racial problem in France. Okay, so maybe that was true, maybe that wasn't, but there was, a lot of people say that there was a much bigger integration in France of Black Americans than they ever had felt in the United States. We don't know how true that is, but I'm sure that's true in some cases. And soon we're going to have the Josephine Baker, and I think we're going to probably be hearing more about that. Democrats Abroad is going to be doing something with the Democrats Abroad France.
We have to.
Josephine Baker event. But she criticized American male writers. She thought that they weren't dealing with the problems that were right in front of their very eyes. And Richard Wright virtually got kicked out of the United States and moved to Paris. And of course, she was close.
But that
to him
doesn't,
to the end.
but the issue here is the fact that she didn't pay attention in her book to Black women. But remember the beginning, well, you're all too young, but we remember the beginning of Ms. Magazine. And Ms. Magazine was highly criticized for years because it was a white middle class audience until, I don't know, when Gloria Steinem took over, or no, she started it. I don't know when, because I stopped reading it. But now it's very, very inclusive, and it has changed its readership tremendously. But it was the same thing in the United States. Granted, the problem is different in the United States, but still, Simone de Beauvoir did not see the necessity at that time of being all inclusive. That's for sure.
Well, thanks for taking that on, Connie and Sheila, and thank you so much for this webinar on Simone de Beauvoir and on your experience, your journey translating The Second Sex. It's really been a pleasure. Thanks also to Angela Fobbs for the tech support when I had to step out for a minute to take care of my son, and also for the slides. It's really been an honor to have you here, Sheila and Connie. If you all don't already know, Sheila, Connie, Angela Fobbs, and we make up the planning team of Books Abroad, the feminist reading group of the Global Women's Caucus. And this event is a part of our Feminist Literary Festival taking place all month. I see some familiar faces, so I know you've been at the events already, but I hope to see you at some of our other events. What we have coming up next is on Thursday night, I'm going to be giving a talk on the life and work of Octavia Butler. And then next week, we have Diane Johnson and Alan Riding in conversation. And then finally, we will finish off with a Books and Cocktails event on Sunday, the 24th. In the meantime, every Friday, 2 more Fridays, I'll be hosting a writing drop-in, which is basically a writing session. So if you want to flex your creative muscles, join us for that as well. Thanks again for being here. You can find all of the events that I just mentioned on our website. That's demsabroad.org/WC. And then you just click the button that says Feminist Literary Festival. You should RSVP for each event that you would like to attend. Okay, I hope to see you again and have a great night. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Shelley, I have the same one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Angela, can we just chat really quick? If you don't
Sure.
mind?
Yeah, okay.
But don't numbers play a role in this whole thing, you know? I mean,
numbers? What do you mean?
there are more Black people in America that have something to do with the economy, as in France. Therefore, of course, the French people are not going to be so strong against the Black people because they're not messing up what they want to do in France. But in America, they are. So that, I'm not sure
that's a good point.
Difference at all. I think it has to do with money. How many? And when there are too many, then we got a problem.
Yeah. It really does affect how much.
I'm gonna say good night.
Good night, Sheila. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job for you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
It was wonderful.
It was.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
I don't think she even knows she's still on. I think we'll just stop her video. That's so funny. Yeah, so Thursday night, um, so I don't know who should introduce me and introduce everything. Would you mind, like, how would you mind, like, just doing the intro and leaving?
Yeah,
Or can you do that?
I think I can
Okay.
do that.
Okay, perfect.
Let me just
Oh,
make sure I have the right
I'll stop
time.
recording.
Oh yeah.